The child alien Lyra's burnt, bruised corpse lay in the charred ruins, as Krenium war machines stomped overhead, intent on slaughtering every last one of her species. Lyra's whole world was aflame. Her people, the humanoid Xi'an, were being exterminated, city by burning city. Lyra had barely survived an orbital bombardment that incinerated her home, leaving her an orphan scavenging the rubble of her once proud civilization. She dodged killer insectoid patrols, the feared Krenium warriors bent on genocide. Lyra thought all hope was lost, until she discovered the crashed dropship of Earth's most ruthless soldiers. Inside, she found a human warrior, battered and bleeding, a killer named Sergeant Lewis Jenkins. But he was a killer who showed surprising mercy. Jenkins aimed his rifle at Lyra, but then lowered it, seeing she was a starving, terrified kid. He gave her his last food ration. Now Lyra and her unlikely human protector are trapped together in the wreckage as the xenocidal Krenium hordes draw near, and the distant thunder of human forces rumbles closer. The fate of a helpless alien girl rests on Jenkins and his battle-forged human strength. He must keep her safe or she dies. He cannot fail this innocent child, not when everyone else in the universe abandoned her. He and his fellow humans are her only hope now. High above the burning world of Zephyrus, Admiral Grayson stood on the bridge of the Earth Defense Force flagship, Indomitable. A stern, uncompromising man, he stared at the holographic display showing the distress beacon from Sergeant Jenkins' crashed dropship. Grayson turned to his comms officer. "Send a squad of our best Marines down there immediately. They are to extract Sergeant Jenkins at all costs and return him safely to the Indomitable." But one of Grayson's subordinates, Captain Alexander Volkov, had other plans. When Grayson left the bridge, Volkov slipped away to brief the rescue team himself. The Marines snapped to attention as he entered the hangar bay. Volkov's eyes were cold, his voice sharp. "Men, we lost many brothers to these alien savages. This is our chance to teach them the consequences of spilling human blood. When you find these creatures, you will show them no mercy. For Earth." Volkov smiled darkly as the dropships blasted toward the planet's surface, loaded for bear. He had sworn to avenge his family's deaths at Krenium hands. This was his moment. On the ground, Jenkins, Lyra, and Tyros's resistance fighters crept toward the Krenium supply depot. Lyra used her small size to sneak in through a drainage pipe. Inside, she planted explosive charges among the weapon crates. Covering her, Jenkins and Tyros took out the guards with silenced shots. As alarms started blaring, Jenkins yelled into his radio, "Lyra, get out of there now!" The girl came running, diving behind a barricade just as the depot erupted in a massive fireball. Krenium warriors poured from the burning structure, and the resistance opened up on them in a hail of gunfire. Jenkins saw a Krenium lining up a shot on Tyros and tackled the alien out of the way, the plasma bolt scorching the dirt where he had stood a split second before. Tyros clasped Jenkins's arm. "You saved my life, Sergeant. I am in your debt." Before Jenkins could respond, human dropships screamed out of the sky. He felt a surge of relief seeing the Earth Defense Force insignia. The cavalry had arrived. His fellow humans would help them finish off these Krenium bastards. But as the dropship ramps slammed down, it was immediately clear something was very wrong. Marines stormed out with rifles raised, but they were aiming at Tyros and his Zephyrians. Jenkins watched in horror as the human soldiers opened fire, their bullets tearing through the resistance fighters. Tyros fell with a cry, blood seeping from his wounds. "Cease fire! Cease fire, goddammit!" Jenkins sprinted toward the Marines, waving his arms. "I'm Sergeant Jenkins. Hold your fire. These Zephyrians are on our side. They're fighting the Krenium." Captain Volkov strode down the ramp, his expression twisted with hate and rage. He raised his pistol and fired a shot over Jenkins's head. "They are all enemies of Earth. No exceptions," Volkov snarled. "These freaks killed my family, and I will have my vengeance. All aliens will die." The Marines' weapons swiveled to target Jenkins and Lyra now too. Jenkins shoved the girl behind him, shielding her with his body as he faced down Volkov and the Marines' gun barrels. He had to stop this madness before Volkov's bloodlust doomed them all. The fate of the Zephyrian resistance and the innocent child Lyra hung in the balance. Jenkins charged toward Volkov, dodging bullets whistling past his head. He slammed into the vengeful captain, knocking his pistol from his grip. They grappled in the dirt, Jenkins struggling to restrain Volkov's rage-fueled strength. Volkov snarled, spittle flying. "You treasonous bastard! Collaborating with these alien scum!" He reached for his knife, but Jenkins pinned his arm. Lyra darted forward, interposing her small body between the two men. Her eyes, filled with fear, but also steely resolve, bored into Volkov's hate-twisted features. The girl spoke softly but firmly. "Please, no more killing. We fight together or we all die." Volkov's finger twitched on his rifle's trigger. Jenkins held his breath. The captain's gaze flickered from Lyra to Jenkins and back. A tense heartbeat passed. Suddenly, an inhuman screech split the air. A horde of insectoid warriors burst from the jungle, plasma rifles blazing. It was Zektar and his elite Krenim hunters, mandibles dripping, hungry for blood. "Incoming!" Jenkins bellowed. He hauled Volkov to his feet as a plasma bolt sizzled past. Zephyrian resistance fighters scattered, diving for cover in the supply depot's blasted ruins. Humans and Zephyrians alike fell under the merciless onslaught. Tyros grabbed Jenkins' shoulder, his face grim. "We must combine our forces, Sergeant. It's the only way." Jenkins locked eyes with Volkov. The captain hesitated, jaw clenched. Then he gave a sharp nod. "You heard the sergeant," Volkov barked to his Marines. "Defensive positions. Hold the line." Soldiers scrambled to obey as more Krenim poured into the killing ground. Volkov, Jenkins, and Tyros directed their warriors to strategic points among the rubble. Rifle fire and plasma bursts crisscrossed in a deadly web. Lyra crouched by Jenkins's side, pointing out Krenim movements. "They're trying to flank us, Louis. Through that gully." Jenkins relayed her warnings, and the defenders shifted to block the attack. Under Lyra's guidance, Zephyrian fighters set plasma mines and tripwires along likely routes of advance. Krenim shrieks echoed as they stumbled into the traps. Through the smoke and chaos, Jenkins glimpsed Volkov fighting like a man possessed. The captain rained fire on the Krenim with ruthless efficiency, his earlier fury now channeled against the true foe. A plasma bolt struck a human Marine, burning through his armor. The man fell, screaming. Without hesitation, Volkov lunged from cover, heedless of the shots peppering around him. He dragged the wounded Marine to safety, stanching his bleeding with a torn sleeve. Jenkins saw the change in Volkov's eyes as the captain rejoined the fight. The hatred was gone, replaced by determination and newfound respect for the Zephyrians battling at his side. But it wasn't enough. More and more Krenim surged forward, heedless of losses. Jenkins and the survivors fell back, step by bloody step. They took 2 foes for each defender lost, but the Krenim tide kept coming. Zektar strode through the carnage, his warbling call whipping his soldiers to a frenzy. The Krenim pressed in for the kill, plasma blades glinting. Jenkins, Volkov, and Tyros poured shots into their ranks, but the end was near. They were out of tricks, out of time. Jenkins reached for Lyra's hand, sheltering her as the Krenim closed in. He had sworn to protect this child. He would not fail, even at the last. A shadow fell, darker than the billowing smoke. A great roar boomed from above, staggering friend and foe alike. Jenkins looked up to see the Indomitable, ringed by Earth Fleet warships, eclipse the sky. Admiral Grayson's voice blasted from every comm channel. "Soldiers of Earth, stand firm. Reinforcements have arrived. We will show these Krenim the folly of standing against humanity." The fleet opened fire, a storm of kinetic rounds and incendiary shells. The bombardment ripped through Zektar's horde like the fist of an angry god. Krenim warriors vanished in blooms of flame or were hurled broken and blazing across the battlefield. Zektar screamed with rage as his forces crumbled. The warlord fell back, beating a fighting retreat before the human fleet's inexorable advance. In the sudden silence after the guns fell quiet, Jenkins sagged against a shattered wall. Lyra still clutched protectively to his chest. Volkov stumbled to his side, his face streaked with grime, but eyes clear. As the smoke cleared, Admiral Grayson strode through the battlefield, his keen eyes surveying the carnage. Jenkins straightened up and saluted, blood and grime streaking his face. "Admiral, permission to introduce Lyra, a native Zephyrian who fought bravely at our side." Grayson's brow furrowed as he took in the small alien girl. Lyra stepped forward, meeting the Admiral's gaze unflinchingly. In a clear, steady voice, she began to recount the horrific atrocities the Krenim had inflicted on her people. She spoke of the burning cities, the mass executions, the children orphaned and left to starve. As Lyra's words painted a picture of unimaginable suffering, Grayson's stern expression softened. He knelt to Lyra's level, placing a hand on her slight shoulder. "Your courage and resilience do your people credit, young one. Earth will not stand idly by while such injustice occurs." Rising, Grayson activated his comlink. "Earth Command, this is Admiral Grayson. I am proposing an immediate alliance with the Zephyrian resistance against the Krenim threat." There was a crackle of static, then a terse reply. "Admiral, need I remind you of the casualties we've already sustained? What do these aliens have to offer?" Grayson's jaw tightened. Their knowledge of the terrain and enemy tactics is invaluable, and more than that, it's the right thing to do. We cannot turn our backs on their suffering. A heavy sigh came over the comm. "Very well, Admiral. The alliance is approved, but the Zephyrians must prove their worth." Grayson turned to Jenkins, Lyra, and Tyros. "Sergeant, I'm tasking you with leading a joint strike on the Krenim Command Center. Show us what this alliance can do." As the resistance fighters and Marines prepared for the daring raid, Jenkins found Lyra sitting quietly, staring at a small holopic. It showed a smiling Zephyrian couple holding a tiny baby. With a pang, Jenkins realized it must be Lyra's parents. He sat beside her, offering silent support. After a moment, Lyra spoke. "They died in the first attack. I couldn't save them." Jenkins swallowed hard. "I lost my family, too. The pain never goes away, but you learn to carry it." Lyra leaned against him, and Jenkins put an arm around her slim shoulders. A bond of shared grief and determination joined them, deeper than the divide of species or origin. Tyros watched the pair from a distance, a knowing look in his eyes. He approached and clasped Jenkins' shoulder. "Take care of each other out there. In war, love is the most powerful weapon we have." As the twin moons rose over the ruined city, the strike force gathered. Grim-faced Marines checked their weapons while Zephyrian fighters sharpened gleaming plasma blades. Volkov stepped forward, his eyes haunted but determined. "I have intelligence on the command center's defenses. Let me help make this right." Lyra nodded, gesturing for him to join the mission briefing. As the holographic projections of the Krenim stronghold rotated slowly, she highlighted weak points and critical junctures. "We'll infiltrate under cover of darkness," Lyra explained, her voice ringing with hard-earned authority. "I know every hidden route in and out. We'll plant the charges and cripple their operations before they even know we're there." As the strike force faded into the night, Jenkins caught a last glimpse of Grayson's face, etched with mingled hope and trepidation. The fate of two races now rested on this desperate gambit, a chance to strike back against genocide. Lyra moved through the shadows like a wraith, her slight form concealing a core of steel. With hand signals and whispers, she guided the humans and Zephyrians through twisting maintenance ducts and abandoned access tunnels, always one step ahead of the Krenim patrols. Jenkins marveled at her skill and courage, a fire kindled in such a young soul by the forge of war and loss. In her he saw the future he fought for, a future where children like Lyra could grow up free from the specter of annihilation. As they approached the command center's pulsing heart, Lyra paused, her small hand poised over the entry keypad. She took a steadying breath, the air crackling with tension. The hopes of her people rested on her slim shoulders in this pivotal moment. Softly, Jenkins laid a hand over hers, offering his strength and conviction. No words were needed. Together they pressed the key, and the blast door slid open with a hiss. The strike team charged forward into the crimson-lit chamber, weapons raised, a battle cry on their lips. There could be no hesitation, no quarter given. The Cranium command crew barely had time to turn before the bolts and blades found their marks. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks as Volkov's demolition charges ripped through delicate circuitry. At the center of the chaos, Lyra stood firm, a tiny figure dwarfed by the carnage but unbowed. Her eyes blazed with righteous fury as she directed the mayhem, turning the enemy's own fortress against them. And yet, even as Jenkins fought at her side, cutting down Krenim warriors with every stroke, he sensed that this was only the beginning. The command center was just one cog in the Krenim's vast war machine. To truly end this conflict and save the Zephyrian people, they would need to... Plasma bolts seared the air as Jenkins, Volkov and Tyros charged into the fray, engaging the Krenim elite guard in brutal close-quarters combat. Jenkins slammed the butt of his rifle into a guard's chitinous face, shattering mandibles. Tyros grappled with another, his plasma blade flashing in a deadly arc. Volkov fought like a man possessed, firing short controlled bursts that stitched a line of fallen Krenim across the corridor. Lyra darted between the towering warriors, her small size an asset. She targeted joints and soft tissues with vicious precision, felling guards twice her size with lightning strikes. A Krenim sniper, hidden in the shadows, lined up a shot on Jenkins' unprotected back. Volkov saw the telltale glint of a scope and lunged, throwing himself into the path of the searing bolt. It struck him in the chest, burning through armor and flesh. Volkov fell, blood pooling beneath him. Jenkins spun, dispatching the sniper with a well-placed shot. He knelt at Volkov's side, cradling the dying man's head. Volkov coughed, flecks of crimson staining his lips. "I was wrong," he rasped. "All this time I let hatred consume me. But you showed me there's still good in this universe, Jenkins. Promise me you'll finish this, for all of us." Volkov's eyes glazed over, his final breath rattling in his chest. Jenkins bowed his head, grief and resolve warring within him. He rose, Volkov's dog tags clenched in his fist. "I swear it, my friend, your sacrifice will not be in vain." With renewed determination, the strike force battled their way to the command center's pulsing core. They breached the final blast doors to find a scene out of a nightmare. Rows of stasis pods lined the walls, each containing the twisted form of a Zephyrian test subject. Cables and tubes snaked from their emaciated bodies to a central machine that pulsed with malevolent energy. Lyra cried out in anguish, rushing to the nearest pod. Inside lay a female Zephyrian, her once vibrant skin mottled and grey. "Sister, no, what have they done to you?" A cold, imperious voice cut through the chamber. "Magnificent, isn't it? The power to eradicate entire species, all thanks to your people's noble sacrifice." The Krenim lead scientist stepped from the shadows, his pale eyes glittering with madness. His spindly finger hovered over a control panel. "One more step and I release the virus. It will scour this planet clean and deliver the vengeance we Krenim were too weak to enact ourselves. The choice is yours, humans. Surrender or bear witness to an extinction-level event." Jenkins' mind raced, calculating odds and angles. Slowly he lowered his rifle. "You win, Doctor. We'll stand down." The scientist smiled, triumph etched in every cruel line of his face. Jenkins turned to his team, defeat heavy in his voice. "Fall back to the evac point. There's nothing more we can do here." As the strike force filed out, heads hung low, Jenkins caught Lyra's eye. An unspoken understanding passed between them. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, and slipped away into the shadows. The Krenim's finger tightened on the trigger. "Peace? There can be no peace until every last one of you is eradicated. This is our revenge." A small shape dropped from the ceiling behind him. Lyra drove her plasma blade into the base of the scientist's skull, severing his spinal cord in one swift stroke. His body crumpled, finger spasming on the trigger mechanism. Alarms blared as the virus containment failsafes disengaged. Lyra sprinted to the control panel, her hands flying over the alien interface. "I can't stop the release. The virus is already in the ventilation system. Jenkins joined her, desperately searching for a solution. His gaze fell on the stasis pods, their power cables thrumming with energy. The pods! If we overload them, the electrical surge might fry the viral particles in the air ducts. Together they raced down the rows, ripping out cables and jamming rifle barrels into sparking sockets. The pods began to hum, vibrating with barely contained power. Lyra hesitated over her sister's pod, tears streaking her face. Jenkins laid a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We have to, Lyra. It's the only way to save the others." With a sob, Lyra wrenched the final cable free. Arcs of electricity crackled through the chamber, the pods straining at their housings. Jenkins grabbed Lyra's hand and sprinted for the exit, the roar of overloading circuitry rising behind them. They dove through the blast doors, just as a searing white flash consumed the room, the shockwave slamming them to the ground. Acrid smoke billowed from the ruined chamber, the virus incinerated in the inferno. Jenkins pulled Lyra close as she wept for her lost sister and all the Zephyrians who had suffered at the Crenim's hands. He held her tight, his own eyes stinging with unshed tears. "It's over, Lyra. You saved them. You saved everyone." But even as the words left his lips, Jenkins knew their fight was far from finished. The Crenim's cruelty ran deeper than he had ever imagined. As they stumbled from the smoldering ruins of the command center, Jenkins' comm crackled to life. Admiral Grayson's voice, tight with urgency, filled the air. "All units, we have a situation in orbit. A Crenim dreadnought just warped into the system, and it's unleashing some kind of..." As the strike force fought their way back out of the crumbling command center, Jenkins locked eyes with Zektar across the sparking wreckage of the control room. Lyra's hands flew over the alien interface, desperately trying to halt the detonation sequence. Zektar's mandibles twitched in a cruel approximation of a smile. "You're too late, human," he hissed. "The weapon will be released and your precious Zephyrians will be wiped from existence. My victory is assured." Jenkins gritted his teeth, rage and desperation warring within him. He knew every second counted, but he couldn't let Zektar's taunts go unanswered. Zektar threw back his head and laughed, a grating, kittinous sound. "You think your pitiful alliance matters? You're insects beneath the boot of the Crenim Imperium." Jenkins stepped forward, dropping his rifle and unsheathing his combat knife. "Then face me, Zektar. Prove your superiority in single combat. Or are you a coward hiding behind your machines and weapons?" Zektar's eyes narrowed, his pride stung. He gestured sharply to his guards, who lowered their weapons and stepped back. "I will enjoy breaking you, human. And when I'm done, I'll make your pet Zephyrian watch as her world burns." With a roar, Zektar charged, his plasma blades flashing. Jenkins met him head-on, ducking under the Crenim's swinging arm and driving his knife into the gap beneath Zektar's chest plate. The commander howled in pain and rage, lashing out with a vicious backhand that sent Jenkins sprawling. Nearby, Lyra's fingers danced across the control panel, sweat beading her brow as she fought to breach the system's encryption. She could hear the clash of blades and the grunts of exertion from the two warriors, but she forced herself to tune it out, pouring all her focus into the task at hand. Jenkins rolled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Zektar pressed the attack, his blades weaving a deadly pattern through the air. Jenkins parried frantically, searching for an opening. The Crenim commander was fast and strong, his exoskeleton deflecting blows that would have felled a human. Jenkins heaved against Zektar's strength, muscles straining. "Never," he snarled through gritted teeth. "We'll fight you to our last breath, Zektar. For Earth, for Zephyrus, for every world you've destroyed." With a burst of desperate strength, Jenkins shoved Zektar back and swept his legs out from under him. The Crenim crashed to the deck, but rolled away before Jenkins could press the advantage. Lyra's console beeped urgently, and she let out a cry of triumph. "I've got it! The self-destruct sequence, it's disabled!" But her elation turned to horror as Zektar, hearing her words, lunged for the control panel. "If I can't have victory," he snarled, "I'll settle for revenge." His fist slammed down on the release mechanism for the bioweapon. Alarms blared, and containment fields shimmered as the deadly virus began to vent into the room. Zektar laughed maniacally, even as a bloody froth bubbled from his lips. Jenkins, seeing the look of terror on Lyra's face, felt a cold clarity descend over him. He leapt forward, tackling Zektar away from the console and driving his knife up beneath the Krenim's jaw with a sickening crunch. Zektar convulsed, his laughter turning to gurgles as he thrashed in his death throes. Jenkins staggered to his feet, rushing to Lyra's side. "We need to go now!" He grabbed her hand and they ran for the exit, sealing the blast doors behind them just as the bioweapon alarms reached a fevered pitch. In the corridor outside, they found Tyros and the rest of the strike force, battered but victorious. "The perimeter is secure," Tyros reported, his eyes widening as he took in Jenkins' bloody appearance and Lyra's ashen face. "What happened in there?" Jenkins shook his head, the adrenaline draining away and leaving him feeling weak and shaky. "Zektar, the bioweapon. It's contained. But we need to get out of here. This whole place could be contaminated." Tyros nodded grimly, signaling to his fighters. They fell back through the twisting corridors, Jenkins and Lyra at the center of their protective formation. As they emerged into the smoke-filled night, the command center shuddered behind them, secondary explosions ripping through its structure. Aboard the Indomitable, Admiral Grayson watched the scene unfold on the view screen, his face lined with concern. The Krenim dreadnought still loomed in orbit, a monstrous shadow blotting out the stars. As he opened his mouth to issue orders, the dreadnought's hull shimmered and rippled, like a mirage on a hot day. Grayson leaned forward, hardly daring to breathe. The dreadnought seemed to flicker, fading in and out of existence. Then, with a soundless implosion, it vanished entirely, leaving only a faint after-image burned into the retinas of those watching. On the planet's surface, Jenkins and Lyra stared up at the sky, hardly comprehending what they had just witnessed. Tyros, his face a mix of awe and disbelief, turned to them. "What just happened? Where did the dreadnought go?" Jenkins shook his head slowly, a wild hope kindling in his heart. "I don't know," he said softly, "but I think we just witnessed a miracle." In the stunned silence that followed, a crackling transmission came through on Jenkins' comm unit. It was Admiral Grayson, his voice tight with urgency. "Sergeant Jenkins, do you read me? We've got reports coming in from across the system. The Krenim ships, their ground forces, they're just vanishing, disappearing into thin air. Something's happening, something big." As the Indomitable's hangar doors slid open, Jenkins and Lyra strode out to a hero's welcome. Marines and Zephyrian fighters alike cheered and clapped as the battered but triumphant pair made their way to where Admiral Grayson stood waiting, his face etched with a mix of relief and pride. He turned to Jenkins, his eyes glinting. "Sergeant, your actions have gone above and beyond the call of duty. I'm recommending you for an immediate promotion to lieutenant." Jenkins blinked, stunned. "Thank you, sir," he managed, his voice thick with emotion. Lyra beamed at him, her small hand slipping into his. Grayson smiled, then turned to address the assembled crowd. "Today, we stand united against the Krenim threat. Together, we will bring an end to their tyranny and restore peace to the galaxy." As the Indomitable prepared to depart Zephyrus and join the main fleet, Lyra's sister Kara pulled Jenkins and Lyra aside, her face grave. "There's something you need to know," she said urgently. "During my captivity, I overheard the Krenim scientists talking about a secret base on Zephyrus's moon. They're mass-producing the bioweapon there, preparing to unleash it on other worlds." Lyra nodded, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We can't let them do to other planets what they did to ours." They brought the information to Admiral Grayson, who immediately recognized the gravity of the situation. A covert strike team could infiltrate the base and destroy the production facility, he mused, but it would be incredibly risky. "Sir," Jenkins said, stepping forward, "Lyra and I have experience with Krenim tactics and technology. With Tyros and a small team of our best fighters, we can get the job done." Grayson studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, Lieutenant, I'm entrusting this mission to you. We'll provide you with a stealth ship equipped with our most advanced cloaking tech." As they made their way to the hangar where their ship awaited, Jenkins pulled Lyra aside. In the quiet corridor, he took her hands in his eyes searching her face. "Lyra, he began, then hesitated. "These past few weeks fighting alongside you, I've come to realize—" Their lips met in a tender, lingering kiss, a promise of what could be if they survived the battles to come. Tyros, coming around the corner, saw them and smiled softly to himself. He would gladly give his life to protect their budding love. Aboard the stealth ship, the team reviewed the scant intelligence they had on the moon base. "We'll use the cloaking device to land undetected," Jenkins said, pointing to a holomap. "Then we'll infiltrate here, at this service entrance." Tyros nodded grimly. "Once inside, we'll need to locate the main production chamber and plant the charges. I'll hack into their systems and disable the security protocols," Lyra added, her fingers already dancing across a datapad. As the moon loomed in their view screen, a barren grey orb pockmarked with craters, Jenkins felt a sense of foreboding wash over him. Something told him this mission would be their greatest challenge yet. The ship sat down in a sheltered ravine, its cloaking field shimmering. The team disembarked, checking their weapons and gear. Jenkins took point, Lyra close behind, as they crept toward the base's perimeter. At first, it seemed their infiltration was going smoothly. Lyra's slicing skills got them past the outer security doors, and they slipped inside, keeping to the shadows. But as they penetrated deeper into the complex, they began to realize the true scale of the Krenim operation. Soldier patrols marched through the halls, their numbers far greater than expected. Automated defense turrets swiveled and hummed at every junction, and in the distance, the ominous thrum of heavy machinery echoed through the metal corridors. Jenkins signaled for a halt, his face grim. "This isn't just a research outpost," he whispered. "It's a damn fortress." They exchanged a glance, a single thought passing between them. Whatever it took, whatever the cost, they had to destroy this place. As Jenkins, Lyra, and Tyros fought their way deeper into the Krenim base, the stench of death and suffering assaulted their nostrils. Screams of agony echoed through the cold metal corridors, punctuated by the hum and crackle of arcane machinery. A sickening realization dawned on them as they breached the inner sanctum. The Krenim had been conducting heinous experiments on their captives. Lyra froze, her eyes wide with horror, as she saw the emaciated figure strapped to a blood-stained operating table. Despite the ravages of torture, she recognized him instantly. "Father!" she cried, rushing forward, heedless of danger. Jenkins and Tyros provided cover fire as Lyra frantically worked to free her father from his bonds. The Zephyrian leader's once proud form was wasted and frail, his skin mottled with bruises and puncture wounds. His eyes flickered open, unfocused at first, then filling with recognition and disbelief. Tears streamed down Lyra's face as she cradled her father's broken body. Jenkins felt a surge of rage at the Krenim's cruelty, mixed with a fierce protectiveness for this brave girl who had already lost so much. "We need to move now," Tyros shouted, spraying plasma bolts at the first wave of Krenim soldiers pouring into the room. Jenkins scooped up Lyra's father, slinging the frail Zephyrian over his shoulder. "Lyra, take point! Get us out of here!" The girl, her face hardened with resolve, nodded sharply and charged forward, blasting a path through the enemy ranks with her pistol. Jenkins and Tyros fell in behind her, the sergeant's rifle barking in controlled bursts while the Zephyrian rebel hacked and slashed with his plasma blades. They fought like demons, Krenim bodies piling around them as they clawed their way back to the extraction point. But the enemy kept coming, heedless of losses, driven by the cold machine logic of their masters. A plasma bolt seared past Jenkins' head, close enough to scorch his hair. He whirled, searching for the shooter, but Tyros was faster. The rebel threw himself in front of Jenkins, just as the second shot lanced out, catching the full force of the blast in his chest. Tyros fell. A charred hole punched through his armor, the stink of burning flesh filling the air. Jenkins dropped to his knees beside his fallen friend, Lyra's father tumbling to the ground as the sergeant frantically tried to stem the flow of blood. But it was too late. Tyros gripped Jenkins' arm with failing strength, his eyes already clouding over. "Don't let our fight be in vain," he gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Protect Lyra. Protect her family. Promise me." "I promise," Jenkins choked out, tears cutting through the grime on his cheeks. "I'll keep them safe, I swear it on my life." Tyros smiled faintly, his hand falling away. The light faded from his eyes as his final breath rattled out, and he was gone. Jenkins surged to his feet with a roar of anguish and fury, snatching up his rifle and laying waste to the Krenim with a storm of fire. Lyra joined him, her own heart breaking even as her aim remained true. Together, they cut a path to the hangar, Lyra half carrying, half dragging her semi-conscious father. They stumbled aboard their waiting ship, Jenkins laying down covering fire until Lyra had sealed the hatch. As the small craft blasted free of the moon's surface, Jenkins slumped against the bulkhead, Tyros's body cradled in his arms. Lyra knelt beside him, her face streaked with grime and tears. "We can't leave the others," she whispered fiercely. "We have to go back for them." Jenkins met her gaze, his own eyes haunted but determined. "We will," he promised. "We'll find a way to save them, but we can't do it alone." As Jenkins plotted a course back to the Indomitable, his mind raced with desperate plans and impossible schemes. They had struck a blow against the Krenim, but at a terrible cost, and he knew in his bones that the fight was far from over. He would need every ounce of his skill, every shred of his courage to keep his promise to Tyros and protect the ones he loved. But he would do it, or die trying, for Lyra, for her father, for all the innocent suffering under the Krenim's brutal reign. As the ship hurtled through the void, Jenkins began to formulate a plan. It was a gamble, a last-ditch effort that could save them all, or doom them to a fate worse than death. But they had run out of options. It was time to take the fight to the enemy, to strike at the very heart of the Krenim's power. He turned to Lyra, his face set with grim determination. "I have an idea," he said, his voice low and urgent, "but I'll need your help to pull it off." Jenkins crept through the base's dimly lit corridors, the stolen Krenim security key gripped tightly in his hand. Sweat beaded on his brow as he approached the command center, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew that time was running out, and he had to act fast to give Lyra and the others a chance to escape with the captives. As he rounded a corner, Jenkins found himself face to face with a squad of elite Krenim guards. They leveled their plasma rifles at him, their eyes glinting with malice behind their insectoid helmets. Jenkins didn't hesitate. He charged forward, ducking and weaving as plasma bolts sizzled past his head. He slammed into the first guard, driving his fist into the Krenim's gut. The guard doubled over and Jenkins snatched his rifle, using it to gun down the others. Alarms blared as more guards poured into the corridor, but Jenkins fought like a man possessed, his stolen rifle spitting fire and death. Finally, he stood before the command center's blast doors, his armor scorched and his body battered. He swiped the security key, and the doors slid open with a hiss. Inside, the base's commander whirled to face him, drawing a wicked-looking plasma blade. The Krenim commander lunged, his blade slashing through the air. Jenkins parried with his rifle, the two weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. They fought back and forth across the command center, consoles shattering and equipment exploding around them. Jenkins took a glancing blow to the shoulder, gritting his teeth against the searing pain. He retaliated with a vicious kick to the commander's knee, feeling the joint give way with a sickening crunch. The Krenim howled in agony, and Jenkins pressed his advantage, battering his foe with a flurry of blows. At last the commander fell, his blade clattering to the floor. Jenkins staggered to the control panel, his vision blurring from pain and exhaustion. With shaking fingers, he overrode the security systems and opened a channel to Lyra. "Lyra, do you read me? You have to get the captives out now. I've unlocked the cells and disabled the turrets. Hurry!" Lyra's voice crackled over the comm, thick with emotion. "Jenkins, what about you? You have to come with us." Jenkins shook his head even though she couldn't see him. I can't. Someone has to set the reactor to overload to destroy this place and the weapons. It's the only way to end this. Before she could respond, Jenkins cut the channel. He turned to the reactor controls, his fingers flying over the keys. Red warning lights flashed as he initiated the overload sequence. He had only minutes to escape before the whole base went up in flames. Jenkins limped towards the exit, his wounded leg dragging behind him. Suddenly a familiar figure stepped from the shadows, blocking his path. It was Zektar, his face twisted with hatred and madness. "You think you've won, human?" Zektar snarled, his mandibles dripping with saliva. "You've only sealed your own doom. I've rigged this base with a secondary self-destruct, one that cannot be stopped. We will all die here together." Jenkins felt a wave of despair wash over him. He knew he couldn't escape in time, not with his injuries, but he couldn't let Zektar win, couldn't let him take this final victory. With a roar of defiance, Jenkins charged forward, tackling Zektar to the ground. They grappled on the floor, trading brutal blows. Zektar's claws raked Jenkins' face, drawing blood, but the human refused to let go. With a final surge of strength, Jenkins managed to activate the command center's blast doors, trapping them both inside. Zektar's eyes widened with realization and fear. "No, what have you done?" Jenkins smiled grimly, blood staining his teeth. "I'm ending this, Zektar, once and for all." He reached for his comm unit, his hand trembling. "Lyra, if you can hear me, I'm sorry, I wish we had more time, but I want you to know I will always be with you. In here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "Keep fighting, Lyra. Build a better future for both our peoples. I believe in you." As the base shook with the first explosions, Jenkins closed his eyes, picturing Lyra's face. He held onto that image as the world around him dissolved into fire and light, a final, peaceful smile on his lips. On the ship, Lyra watched in horror as the Krenim base erupted in a massive fireball, the shockwave rocking their small vessel. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched her father's hand, Jenkins's final words echoing in her ears. Around her, the rescued captives wept and embraced, their joy at being freed tempered by the loss of their saviors. Lyra felt a wave of grief threaten to overwhelm her, but she clung to Jenkins' last request. She would keep fighting, keep building. For him, for Tyrus, for all those who had sacrificed everything. As the ship sped away from the moon, Lyra stood tall, her eyes fixed on the stars. The war was far from over, but with the Krenim's atrocities exposed and their weapons destroyed, there was hope. Hope for a future where humans and Zephyrians could live in peace, side by side. Lyra made a silent vow, there among the stars. She would see that future come to pass, no matter the cost. For Jenkins, for her people, for the countless lives lost. She would... You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.